Welcome to the Expat Empire Podcast, the podcast where you can hear from expats around the world and learn how you can join them. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for the 23rd episode of the Expat Empire Podcast. Before we jump into today's interview, I want to remind you that we at Expat Empire are offering free 30-minute consulting calls to anyone interested in moving abroad. It's never too soon to start planning for your next big life change. Whether you're looking to make your first move abroad, transition into life as a digital nomad, or just want someone to talk to about your moving dreams, we're ready to help you think about the next steps in your journey. Send us a message at expatempire.com and let us know your plans for this year. With that said, today we will be hearing from Louise Wiles. Louise moved with her family to Spain, Portugal, Madeira, and back to the UK over the last 25 years through her husband's career. She's navigated building an international career of her own as a trailing expat spouse, as well as raising a family across many countries and cultures. Without further ado, let's start the conversation. Hey Louise, thanks so much for joining us today on the Expat Empire Podcast.
You're very welcome. Really excited to join you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. You have really an awesome background, not just working in many different countries and moving around with your family, but also working in a very similar space here in the relocation kind of industry and helping people to move abroad. So definitely want to touch on that in our conversation today. But if you could start us off by just telling us a bit about where you're originally from, where around the world you've lived so far, and where you're living right now, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, I'm British, from the UK. And as a child, I lived in America and then didn't move again, came back to the UK when I was 5 and didn't move again. But actually did spend quite a lot of my summers abroad. My dad was is a scientist, and we would get to go and spend, the whole summer in France and Denmark one year. So I did spend time abroad, but not, living full time. Then as an adult, I think probably 30, my husband's job took us to Spain. And so that's when it all started. And we moved to Madrid. Lived there for a couple of years. Then we moved to Lisbon, and that's where my whole sort of experience with Portugal began. We lived in Portugal for 3 years, then moved back to the UK for 3 years, then moved to Madeira for 5 years, and then back to Lisbon for 4. And then we've moved back to the UK about 5 years ago. So Portugal featured very highly in our relocation experience, and a great affinity and love for Portugal.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And definitely want to dive into that and compare our experiences and share what we've seen and heard and loved and maybe loved less about life in Portugal. So that'll be great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, though, how you had that opportunity when you were young, spend some time in the United States.
Well, my dad's a scientist. So,
Right.
he took a job when I remember, we lived on Long Island. So somewhere near Long Island. It was one of the famous labs there. And the intention was to stay there for forever. I think it was really a life move. But then the funding got removed from the research project, and they decided, I think there were opportunities in the States, but they decided on balance they wanted to move back to the UK. So we moved back to the UK. But it was my dad's job that took us there.
Do you think that those early experiences in your childhood were instrumental in sort of thinking as you were also, getting older and getting more professional experience and growing your family, that would be something that you'd want to do? Was it always in the back of your mind, or it just kind of came together and sort of by chance?
Yeah, no, I don't think it was in the back of my mind at all, which was really, I was just thinking about that as I was preparing for this conversation. I was just thinking about my sort of attitude to living abroad. And my husband, now he lived abroad as a child until the age of 11. His dad worked for ICI, and he was born in Kenya. Then they lived in Australia and then Brazil. So he lived abroad until 11, came back to the UK then. Now, he was definitely the one of us that was most interested in living and working abroad. I remember a number of conversations about various jobs with him, about taking jobs. I think there was one in Hong Kong, and I think I probably talked him out of it, which now I feel very guilty and quite sad about. But I think that was quite a good one. But there was always this ongoing conversation between us. But the point we moved to Madrid, though, he was working for Allied Lions then. It was a drinks company, and they bought Domecq in Spain. So he was offered a job working with the consolidation team in Madrid. So that's how he ended up And then I was working in the UK, working for AXA Insurance and doing quite a lot of work for them in France, but just not living in France, just commuting backwards and forth. And I remember I was pretty loath to move to Madrid initially, but that was around giving up my career and my job. So, but it took me a while to make that decision to move too. So we did kind of have this distance relationship for a while, and I would travel to Madrid one weekend, then he'd come back to the UK another. It's quite exotic, quite exciting, actually, quite interesting.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I remember arriving in Madrid at 11, 10 o'clock at night, and having left London, on a Friday night after work, and then going straight out for dinner because you know what Madrid's like, nightlife and everything. It was very, very, exciting. But then, you can't continue a relationship. But we were married at that point. Not good for a marriage. So in the end, I did move to Madrid, and it all started from there, really. And then probably I caught the bug. And it's quite interesting because we're now back in the UK, and I think I'm the one that's kind of, where can we go next? And he's much more, do we need to? So
right.
The tables have turned.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were talking about, it was difficult for you to decide to make the move to go to Madrid, to leave your job that you enjoyed in the UK. So how did you kind of deal with that or come to terms with it? Or how did you think about continuing your career maybe in a different way, but after you moved? Or was that something that you only figured out a little bit further down the path?
Yeah, now I look back on it, I didn't give it the consideration I probably should have done. Working for AXA, there was an opportunity for me to do something in Madrid for them, but I kind of chose not to, really. It's funny, isn't it? I kind of had a mixed relationship with my job. I loved what I was doing. I worked in learning and development, but I didn't love one of the people I was working for. And so I was quite happy to leave that and that kind of relationship and moved to Madrid. Once I had got my head around, I'm going to do this, I left quite easily, I think, and saw it as an opportunity to think differently. I remember being in Madrid the first 3 or 4 months and just thinking, wow, this is fantastic. I was doing Spanish lessons. I wasn't having to get up early in the morning. I was just enjoying the city. And I remember I joined the gym and I could go to the gym whenever I liked. And I really enjoyed those first 3 or 4 months. But actually, it was interesting. I got to about 6 or 7 months in, and I really hit a spot where it's like, well, that was nice, but I can't do that for the rest of my life. I've got to do something, fill my time more productively. And so then I did start thinking about what. And because I'd always been interested in learning and development, it seemed quite a natural thing to do an English course. So I did a teaching English as a foreign language course at International House in Madrid, and learned to be, a teacher, and got a job teaching English, and also had my own business as well. So for about 18 months to 2 years, I kept myself really busy teaching business English all over the city, which I loved because I had some amazing clients. I went to the Palace and taught the furniture restorers and restoration team, which was just fascinating. And I remember an architect, and I used to meet another client at 8 a.m. for churros and coffee in a cafe near. It was actually a really enjoyable way to earn money.
Amazing.
Actually, yeah. And so that's what I did for 18 months. But that really wasn't what I wanted to do. So at the same time, I started thinking, what direction I would have wanted to go in had I been continuing my career. And one thing I always regretted was not having studied psychology as my uni degree. I'd kind of thought about it and then veered in another direction. So I then decided to do a graduate conversion course in psychology with the Open University from the UK, which was all distance learning by post because we weren't particularly online at this point.
Right.
Packs used to arrive in the post, and I'd come back for week-long courses here in the UK. Did that, and then signed up for a master's in occupational psychology with Leicester University, and that was all by post too, and did that from a distance. So it gave me the opportunity to redirect my career slightly, although I still work in the L&D training, coaching field. So that's kind of my passion. But in a way, it became the opportunity, a great opportunity for me in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So it gave you that chance to indeed take a step back, figure out what was next for you and how to attack that from a different angle. And of course, going back for your graduate degree is an amazing opportunity. Yes. And as you were coming out of that, what did you think about in terms of then turning that new education, well, I guess into your business ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, that all came from doing the master's because I had to do a dissertation and you have to do a bit of original research. And
Hmm.
I decided to do it on international relocation. I hadn't realized that there was this wealth of research into sort of adjustment and, moving around the world and how people adjust and the processes they go through in adjusting. And so I decided to focus on that. And that's what I did my dissertation on. By then we'd moved to Portugal. So
Right.
yeah, I think I interviewed about 50 expats in and around Lisbon. And that became my research project. And from that then came this interest in relocation and how people choose to move and what makes it successful, what doesn't. And
Right.
ultimately, from that, I developed my coaching business from there.
That's great. And of course, you're coming at it from someone who has relocated multiple times. So as you were going through the process of interviewing other expats and doing your research, building your business, how did you kind of think through your own experience and how you could apply that to other people's situation? Because now you're able to take a bit more of a maybe objective view of it, and you can understand some of the psychological factors that were involved in the adjustments that you had to make as well. So did you have any kind of thoughts or breakthroughs and, development in your own process as you went through that as well?
Yeah, I think it was interesting because I suppose my dissertation focused on, because you always have to have a theory that you're, or some kind of concept. So it was all around expectations and setting expectations.
Right.
And so I was interviewing people and asking them about sort of how their expectations impacted their ability to adjust, and particularly around the expectations they had for company support, because I was relating it to the corporate sector. And from that I learned, some people were supported really well, others not at all. Yeah, that did have an impact on the way they adjusted initially, but not longer term. People found ways through it, whether they were supported well or not.
Right.
Which was interesting. Not to say that there shouldn't be any support, because I honestly believe that companies can do, and it does make a difference if they support well. And there's a whole load of thought and ideas around that. But I kind of related it to my experience where we didn't really ever have much support from companies. They would provide accommodation costs and moving costs, but in terms of finding accommodation, in terms of sorting out documentation and utilities and all of that, we always did that ourselves. So I think it's really helpful if you can have that support. And I would always recommend to people, if you have the budget, that you do look for that support, because it can save you so much time. And it was only in our very last house move, it wasn't even a location move, we just moved one location from one house to another in Cascais, and the agent offered to do a lot of the admin for us, and we're like, oh wow, so we didn't have to go and stand in these queues for all these
Right.
utilities and things. And then I realized what a time saver that is, and how lovely it was to have that support. So I'd always recommend people to have a budget for that and get support for that. But so how did it influence the whole thing has fed into what I do. So I wrote a book 3 years ago, and a lot of the ideas that I developed from that first piece of research have been fed into that. And I subsequently did some other research in 2012 with my former business partner, looking at career choices of expat partners. And so it's all kind of been a journey, and it's all come together in the book in the way that I work with clients. But if there was one message I would take from it all, it would be around decision making. And of course, it depends on the type of person you are, and whether you're a single person relocating for adventure and staying in countries for fairly short periods of time, versus people who are making life-changing longer-term decisions, perhaps for retirement or to stay in the country for 3 or 4 years. I think if you feel that latter person, then really taking time to understand the challenges and the opportunities, because I think you want to put yourself off, but just because I think you want to make an informed decision. I think from my research, what I realized was it wasn't so much the support, it was the expectations of support that had an impact on people's ability to adjust. So having expectations, setting realistic expectations about what it means to move and what impact that will have on your life, and making sure that you know what you want from it. I think often people think about moving, I'm going to move from the UK to Portugal, and it's all about that move, that physical move. And then they get to Portugal, and then it's, well, And I suppose this is what happened to me in Madrid. Oh, I got to Madrid, and then it was okay. So now, what do I do with my life? And
Right.
that's the same. So what I'm saying is, at that point of decision, really think about why you're making this move, professionally and personally, and from a family perspective, and what you want it to, or you hope for it to create for you.
Sure. And to that end, I guess taking that thread, you went from then Madrid to Portugal. And what was your expectation as you made that move? And of course, what caused it? And how did you think that might, change your life and life of the rest of your family as well?
Yeah, well, at that time, it was just my husband and myself. And the reason for the move was that his boss was asked to go and run the business in Portugal. And so he asked Phil to go as FD. So that was why we ended up in Lisbon. Yeah, what were my expectations for it? I knew that I didn't want to continue teaching English professionally. But I was in the process of doing my master's. So I guess I spent the time wondering how I was going to create a business or career for myself in Lisbon. If I had my time again, I would have just got stuck into looking for some consultancy work. I didn't. That was probably, if there was a mistake I made, it was that I kind of hung back a bit there. And I wish I'd done more, been more proactive. I actually got very involved in them. There's an organisation that supports expats called International Women in Portugal, which runs out of, in the Cascais area, Lisbon area. Got very involved in that and volunteered for that, and did quite a lot of English teaching, did go back to English teaching for them, but voluntarily. Yeah, I think probably, yes, Mike, I didn't proactively think about my career enough there. And if I think about any time in my life when I really could have done with some sort of professional support, that was probably it. I was a bit lost, I'll be honest. I enjoyed my time though. I really loved living there. But then that came to an end and my husband got another job, actually working for an American company. And he could choose, he was European finance director for them. And that meant he was going to travel hugely, travel either the States or right across Europe, Russia, Kazakhstan.
Wow.
So we needed it to be nearer an airport hub. We could have stayed in Lisbon, but it was always going to be an extra flight to a hub to then often move on to the next. So we moved back to the UK, and so that kind of brought that to a close. And at that point, I was pregnant with our first daughter. So then that changed everything.
Yeah. Suddenly there's a lot more to plan for if you were to, well, as you did, eventually make another move or two.
Yeah.
How did it feel to get back into the UK after, I guess by that point, about maybe 5 or so years being abroad across 2 countries? It must have been kind of interesting to reintegrate. Did you move back into the same city that you were in before, or was it a new city as well?
No, we moved to a different area, but near too far from my husband's parents, who were about half an hour from them, and his sister was quite nearby. So, and not, we knew the area. So in that sense, it was quite comfortable and comforting in a way, because then I had my first daughter. So it was lovely to be back and have family around to support. That I would say that was the sort of big plus. Yeah, it took me a while. I think probably we arrived 2 or 3 months before I had my daughter. So I was adjusting to moving back to the UK, but also to motherhood. So the two were combined together, and my husband was traveling huge amounts. He was often not around. So also adjusting to being a mum on my own. I'd say it was a particularly challenging time, but not just because of the repatriation, you're coming back, although that added a dimension. Although I suppose having a child, that really helped as well, because in the UK that you do have amazing sort of postnatal support groups. The National Health Service puts you together with mothers, and so I made friends through that who perhaps I wouldn't have made otherwise. And I really did enjoy being a mum, and so I did actually make the decision when my daughter was about 6 months old that I would just focus on being a mum for a while. I remember having the conversation with my husband and saying, you don't have to go back to work, but I'd always said I wanted to. And at that point I decided I didn't want to for about, it didn't last very long, but I did have about a year and a half. Yeah.
Right.
Just enjoying being a mum. And I think I kind of settled in quite well at that point. I had quite a lot of friends. We bought a house and really kind of settled in to life here. Yeah.
And then uprooted again.
Yes, yes. And
As we often do.
quite very bizarrely, that was a really strange story because my husband was working for this American company, head
Hmm.
offices in Dallas. And really, though, for him to move up the ranks and up to the next positions, we would have had to go to Dallas. And I wasn't that keen.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I wonder whether that was the wrong decision. But he then, just out of the blue, got contact from a headhunter that he'd been in touch with a few years earlier about a job in Madeira, and
Hmm.
and he hadn't looked at this email. It was an email that he'd had for Portugal and hadn't looked at it for months. And for some reason, this particular week, he looked and there was this email from this headhunter. And
Oh,
so
wow.
he then decided, we were talking, I think having children, you then start thinking about grandparents and proximity to grandparents. And had we moved to Dallas, we just wouldn't have had the connection and the contact that we have been able to have by being in Europe. So for me, that was a very big factor in our decision
Hmm.
to be closer so that grandparents could come and stay and we would come back to the UK more often. If you're in Dallas, it's an 11-hour flight. I know my
Yeah.
parents would not have done it as frequently, and probably it
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
a place that they really would choose to go and spend time, whereas they loved coming to Madeira.
Yeah. I'm sure they love to have any opportunity they could to a more island,
Yeah.
or I
Yeah.
guess they were an island, but a different type of island destination, let's say.
Yes, well, yes, very different type, and yeah, so they were very happy to do that. So family was a big factor in the decision there. Yeah, so we ended up then moving to Madeira, and we were there for 5 years. And at the time, at the point we were in family life with two young kids, it was a really good place to be because the Portuguese love kids. They are great with kids. And
Mm.
it was, such a nice climate as well. So a lot of outdoor living, incredibly safe. So yeah, we really enjoyed those 5 years.
So Madeira is a territory, a Portuguese island territory, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine it's quite different from living in the Lisbon area or Cascais, as you mentioned before. So I'd love just to hear a little bit about how that was for you in terms of adjusting to being back in a Portuguese speaking place, but yet at the same time, not on the mainland, not in continental Europe, and
Yeah,
just maybe
yeah.
comparing a bit for our listeners.
I think probably the one thing that sort of drew us quite initially, and that perhaps was fortunate for the company my husband works for because it made us say yes, but was the familiarity actually. So, arriving on this island, I could see it's Portuguese and it had that
Hmm.
feel for sure. It was familiar. It felt a bit like coming home in some ways, but then also with quite a strong British influence because there are a lot of, the history going back, a lot of English families on the island. So
Mm.
a lot of English is spoken. I mean, I hardly ever had to speak Portuguese when I was out because people just so happily speak to you in English. You don't even start a conversation often in Portuguese. I
Right.
found it was to push that. So yeah, a sense of comfort and familiarity for both those reasons, really. How does it differ from Lisbon? Well, it's an island. It's quite small, really. I mean, at least it has what it has going for it is a lot of altitude, so it doesn't feel as small as it actually is. Really, when you think
Hmm.
about the actual size and dimensions. So, beautiful, lovely to go out and drive around the island. And I'm very much a country walking type person versus a city person. So for me, yeah, lovely in that sense. I loved being near the sea. And yeah, easy living in the sense that people are friendly, helpful, I found, and the medicals. I mean, I had my second daughter then we moved. I was forgetting this, but when we moved, I was 3 months pregnant with my second daughter.
Mm.
So once again, moving and settling in, as well as being pregnant and having the changes that come with that. So had my daughter there, really good medical care. I never felt worried about my children and their health at all. I could always find really good medical support.
Was the timing a consideration in relation to already being pregnant with your second daughter? Or did you just not have any concern, just think, okay, let's just go now, and then, we'll figure out the the rest of it once we get there?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't think I gave it any thought whatsoever, really, in that respect. quite bizarre now when I look back on it, I suppose. But no, I had an amazing doctor, a consultant. Yeah, it was fine actually, and yeah, I didn't really worry about it at all. Which I'm not a great worrier, and I often think, when things feel right, that go with the flow, and it felt the right thing for us to be doing. So went with the flow. Or having said that, so the medical side of it, all fine and lovely care and everything, but I did find that first year on the island was incredibly tough. One way in which it differs from, as a foreigner, from living in Lisbon, Cascais areas, there are not that many expats. There's tourists, there are retirees. So okay, there are expats, but they're
right.
retirees. But there weren't a huge number of younger people, our age. There were some, but not. You don't have lots and lots of them. There weren't lots of expat groups. I think things might have moved on, and I think they might exist now, but at that point there weren't. And so making friends, I remember, was tougher. But then I was at home a lot with baby, so that's also difficult. So I did find that bit of it challenging. But with time, I met people and made friends, and then it was lovely. And the kids went to schools or nurseries and schools, and met parents through that. And yeah, we had a very nice life.
Do you think that would have been something that, given the right opportunity, that you would still be living there today? Or did it ultimately kind of feel like it had its chapter, it had its time, but you were ready to move on after a few years?
We proactively made the decision not to stay after 5 years. We'd always said to ourselves we'd go for 5 years and then see. Yeah. So then we decided, I think, island living, it was comfortable living. It was very nice, but to sort of break into and be a real part of it, I don't know that we would ever have achieved that, because you've got families on Madeira who've been there for generations. It's it's quite an interesting sort of community, and whilst people are welcoming, I don't think I ever really felt that I was a part of it. And I don't know whether I ever would have done. That might have been my character. I don't know. But we just got to the point where we thought, we stay, we'll end up staying forever. And is this where we want to be forever? And decided it probably wasn't. So we moved to Lisbon. And as part of a lot of the work my husband was doing was Lisbon based. So it kind of made sense at that point.
Right.
Yeah, moved to Lisbon, better range of schools, and, so just more opportunities generally for living. And we knew it. Yeah. We knew Lisbon. We knew what we were moving to. So it was a proactive choice. We weren't, there was no other reason to move other than us choosing that actually we'd rather be in Lisbon than in Funchal.
Right. Did it feel like a bit of a quote unquote homecoming to when you were there before, or did you feel you had a distance, or, maybe you lived in a different part of town, or the friends that you knew that you'd made before had moved on? How much did it feel like going back to Cascais? It
was lovely, because a few of my friends were still there. So 8 years later, we kind of reunited, but in different circumstances. I'd known them before we'd all had kids, and then went back and their kids were at school, and so were mine. So that was lovely. So yeah. And then, just got settled into school life. It was a completely different stage of life. So, I was there before kids the first time, and the second time with kids. So different ways. I've got involved with school, and met many people through school and through the children, really. So it was very different that second time. Not better, just different.
Sure. And again, so I guess after a couple of years there, then was it for your husband's job that you moved again, or was it just a desire to get back to the UK, or what was kind of your thought process?
Yeah, no, it was totally choice again. So all this time, my husband continued to do the same job. No, it was just actually, so 6 years ago. So it was just as the Portuguese economy was really nosediving, and we just felt we need to make a decision. Either we're going to stay in Portugal and really settle. So we were renting houses. At the point we left, we moved back to Portugal, and we moved 4 times in 4 years. Just because we had so many issues with houses and stories, lessons learned. But we just thought, from an education perspective, are we going to stay here? I mean, there would be nothing wrong with staying from an education perspective there. And Probably some pluses as well, because the kids would have grown up, half Portuguese. And well, my youngest daughter is Portuguese, and that she was born in Portugal and has Portuguese nationality. But
Right.
yeah, I think it was probably more the economic situation and thinking if things really are going to nosedive, perhaps we should go back to the UK. And then the age of my children as well. My eldest was just about to move from primary to secondary, so it seemed like a natural time to move her. And then also the other consideration, parents getting older, being back, so that the children could spend time with, cousins and parents and grandparents, sorry. That was a big factor as well.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Were your children already fluently speaking Portuguese?
My eldest was, my youngest wasn't. Yeah. My youngest will never forgive me, because when we lived in Madeira, my eldest, so she was 3 or 4 when she joined the school they went to, and in the primary years at that school, they taught half a day in Portuguese, half a day in English, because most of their students were actually Portuguese, and they were put in the school to learn English before they then got put back into the Portuguese system at age 9.
Okay.
She would do the Portuguese curriculum in the morning, English in the afternoon. So she was bilingual. My youngest, I put into the nursery, where they were trying to create a foundation of English on which to build in primary. So all the tuition was done in English. And so she didn't learn very much Portuguese. And in fact, she was saying to me the other day, why did you just not put me into the Cruz Vermelho, which was up the road, just down the road from us, where she would have been, doing everything in Portuguese, and she would have just been fluent. So yeah, one big mistake for me there, I think. And actually, if your parents are listening, when you have young children, very young children, you worry about putting them to an environment where perhaps the language is not their native one. I actually don't think it would have been an issue at all now. When I think back on it, I know the care would have been there, and she'd have learned incredibly quickly. I mean, she was surrounded by Portuguese anyway. At home, she would hear it, from friends and, in shops. And we had an empregada, Paula. She used to speak Portuguese all the time to us. So, it wouldn't have been unusual for her to find herself in that situation. So I do feel perhaps we slightly failed her in that respect. Having said that, they both excel at languages here. So obviously something stuck, and they both seem to pick up. They both do Spanish. My youngest daughter does French as well. And they both seem to find it quite easy. So something stuck. Yeah.
And not to maybe dig too much into a sore spot, but you were talking about some of the housing issues. So if you just have any takeaways or lessons for our listeners that you could share, that would be great.
Okay, so on a practical level, when you're looking for a property, just make sure you think very carefully about the kind of day you go and look at one on. I mean, the first property we rented when we went back to Cascais the second time, well, we went to see on a beautiful September day. I remember it was a really warm, beautiful day. And they had all the windows open. There was a lovely pool in the back garden. And we just went, oh, yes, fantastic. And this is the one. And it wasn't ridiculously expensive. A lot of the houses that we'd been looking at like that with pools were just way out of our budget. This one was not. We should have asked a question around that. But we didn't.
Right.
And so we rented it. And then I remember we then moved in, I think probably 2 or 3 months later, actually. And it was a really cold December day. And I remember my husband walking into the kitchen with some boxes, and he just went, oh, we have made the biggest mistake here, because we were all freezing.
Oh,
and what
no.
we had was that there were storage heaters around the house, but they were useless. I mean, they just heated up the piece of wall they were against and didn't give out any heat.
Oh.
And I mean, we spent a very shivery winter in the house. Oh, we had endless problems with it, including bailiffs turning up ready to take all our possessions because of a bill that the owner hadn't paid. I mean, it was, not the best at all. So what I would say, my advice is this, go and look at a property and imagine living there on the worst day of the year when it's cold, dark. Ask yourself serious questions about whether you'll be warm enough. And just really look at all of the bathrooms, the kitchens, and just ask yourself, does this look as though it's been well maintained? Is it, is it all going to function? So much didn't function in this house. And if it's below the market rate for that kind of a property, ask yourself why. Yeah, I mean, I suppose not much we could have done about the bailiffs, because you didn't know what's going on in your landlord's private life, but that was a really traumatic experience for us, because they were literally about to take everything. from the house. And apparently they can, even though it was our possessions, they actually have the legal right to take everything, and they come with a lorry, literally clear the house out, and then you have to prove, what was yours. So we ended up moving out over a weekend. That day
I'm not surprised.
My husband persuaded them to go away and showed them our contract, and they said, right, we're going away. Next time we come back, we will be taking everything. So we literally consulted with lawyers. Lawyers said, get out. And so we phoned a removal company, which was getting to know us quite well by then because they'd already moved us twice. And they came on a Sunday and moved us out within 24 hours into storage and rent. Anyway, it was a bit of an experience. But just ask yourself some questions. And if you meet the landlord, ask some questions and just think, do I trust this person?
Yeah. These are good. Yeah, definitely good pieces of advice. Did you have similar types of just, I guess, housing issues in all the places that you've moved to? Or maybe you've heard, I guess, the horror stories. I mean, I feel like from my experience, I've had difficulties with landlords no matter where I've lived or moved or what part of the city I was in.
Yeah.
It's hard to give advice sometimes just because if it's a high demand place, sometimes you don't have so many options. Or, I mean, I think a good one is, of course, if it seems too good to be true, then it probably is. So, keep a watch out for that. But it can be hard to give advice when, in these difficult situations, you're in a foreign country, different language, the contract's in a different language. You're kind of just trying to figure everything out. You have all your stuff in storage. You're staying in hotels. So, I'm just curious if you had any success.
Needing to find a company. All of those reasons mean that you sort of want to find something, don't you? And certainly around the Qashqai area, and I don't think it's any different now. Demand for property is quite high, so finding something nice was always a challenge. And we moved out of this house into a new one, and this was a brand new property. And perhaps we should have asked ourselves questions about that as well. And we ended up having a lot of problems with that property too, and ended up moving out of that one and finally moved into an apartment, which was absolutely lovely. And this is where we lucked out because this was just the year before we decided we were beginning to think we would probably come back to the UK. But the market had nosedived, and we used to drive past this apartment block and think, it would be fantastic to live there. But the apartments were just far too expensive. And then we managed to get one of the penthouses at the top for a lot less than it had been, 2 years prior, and a lot less than it would ever be now as well. And so we had this lovely apartment for 1 year. And nothing went wrong in it. And it was as lovely as it looked when we moved in, and the facilities all worked. So sometimes it's down to luck as well, unfortunately.
Sure. Yeah.
I would just say, particularly in Portugal, knowing properties in Portugal, take a walk around and just think about the materials that have been used in construction. They're not hugely good at insulation. So because, in the summer months, you don't really need it. But in the winter months, you do. Around Lisbon, it can get quite cold, so just check you've got good heating. And I've heard so many stories of damp, pouring down walls and things. The same in Madeira as well. So just think about things like that and check that out. You can tell from smell as soon as you walk in. If you can smell damp, walk out again is my advice. But you make a judgment around. Hopefully, and we rented all our properties through agents. So they should have been great and good. So that's another thing.
When you worked with the agents, you didn't have to pay for their services, did you? Or
no. They were working. Yeah, they got a cut from the landlord. Yeah.
Right. So I guess just to take us back now that you're back in the UK and take us actually maybe to the beginning of our discussion, but you mentioned maybe that you're now having more of the living abroad or the travel bug. And you've thought about, what other possibilities might be out there for you. So just love to hear about how the last years have been for you back in the UK and what's maybe surprised you, if anything, and how you're kind of thinking about your next years and what might be down the road for you.
Yeah. How's it been back in the UK? Well, we had Brexit. I don't know whether you've heard about Brexit. But
I think I've heard about it. But obviously that was at least some time after you first got back. So maybe, hopefully you had at least a little bit of positive, good experience when you had first made readjustment.
Yes, no, I mean, so the move back, it was mixed, to be honest, I think.
Mm.
My kids went to new school and they both struggled, definitely, the first 3 or 4 months. It took quite a while for my youngest one to settle, more than my eldest. But they both, now, when they look back on it, they'll tell me it was a tough old start.
Mm.
Making friends. Yeah, they went to a school, they're very lucky because they go to a private school in Portsmouth, but it's a school where a lot of the kids have been there since nursery and primary. So it was quite difficult to make friends and sort of break into friendship groups. And I think they probably did feel quite different, my two, and just different perspectives. I mean, my youngest had never lived in the UK, so her whole for her, I don't think I think we realised what a culture shock it was for her, and it did take her a long time to settle. I think schools don't get that. I do quite a lot of work and speak a lot to people who talked about as third culture kids, so kids who've grown up outside of their sort of parents' cultures and lived
Right.
and lived around the world, moving from international school to international school. And international schools are quite good and getting better at recognizing that it takes time for kids to settle. It's not something that happens in the first week. And I would say that for anyone moving around the country, even moving from one location to another, schools have this expectation that we'll buddy you up and you'll be settled within 2 weeks.
Right.
And that wasn't our experience at all. They were perhaps settled, there in the honeymoon phase, the usual sort of cultural adjustment experience, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, and then it all goes wrong. And it certainly did for both of us in different ways. And so that was a challenge for sure. And I was very much focused on that. My husband, because he still worked in Portugal, was in Portugal a lot of the time.
Yeah,
so I was
yeah.
at home with the kids. And then I reacted to it and I really missed Portugal. I just remember that first November thinking I can't focus on anything. I was trying to focus on my business. I had a business partner who actually had also, ironically, we'd both been living abroad and she'd moved home to her, home for her. She'd not been home for 25 years, but Scotland.
Wow.
So we'd both been going through this experience. And I just remember really being quite, just sad, very, very sad, missing friends. And you know what November here in the UK is like, missing sun. I mean, the sun in Lisbon is amazing, the blue skies, missing all of that. And I'm wondering what on earth we had done, to be honest. And it did take me a good 6 months, I think, to get over that and start to settle. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't, we made a choice because we wanted to come back for family and education. Yeah. For whatever reason, we decided possibly the education would be better here. I don't know whether that's true or not, but that was the choice we made. But it wasn't. We didn't leave because we hated our life in Portugal in any way. We really liked it. So there was a lot of loss, I suppose, associated. I don't want to overemphasize that, but I was really sad. Really sad, and I think the kids probably were, but they didn't know how to articulate that. So it made for a tough first year.
Do you have any thoughts about, maybe we could swing it to go back? Or did you have any of those days or weeks?
I think I've always, even now, yeah, not really, no, because having watched the kids settle, once they did start to settle and had built their friendship groups, then, it kind of seemed to them make sense that we stayed. And the school they are at is lovely. They're both really happy now. And, here we are in week 2 of lockdown again in the UK, and they're online schooling now. They're both upstairs in their rooms. They have online schooling with their teachers there. The care is just amazing. So from an educational perspective, it's been good. And my youngest daughter's really into sports, and there's loads of sporting opportunities here. So that's all very positive. So no, I wouldn't go back now, not whilst they're at the stage they're at. But I think in the back of my mind, I have this desire to move on one day. Whether it's splitting our time between the two, I don't know. But I think the really unsettling thing for me about coming back has been Brexit, to be brutally honest with you. And I mean, I really struggled at the time of the referendum and the outcome of that. And ever since, really. And, with Brexit coming to the conclusion it did on, at the end of this year. And now people beginning to realise what the restrictions mean. It just makes
Yeah,
me so
yeah,
angry that it wasn't properly articulated and people didn't fully understand. We've got
right.
supermarkets that apparently are running out of fruit and veg because things aren't, getting through the border because of all the new bureaucracy that we were supposed to be not having, or the new ones being put in place. So, but that's not the point for me. The point for me is that I've always seen myself as, British, but part of Europe as well. And I just find it horrible that identity has kind of been, I still see myself as that, but obviously
Yeah,
I am British. My children, my youngest has Portuguese nationality and so does my husband. So in that sense, at least we have that option.
exactly. That's a fortunate position to be in. Obviously, not ideal, maybe in the way that you'd hoped, but I just was reading about, I think there were something like 18,000 new applications from British citizens here in Portugal to, get residence permits. And it just
Yeah.
opens that huge task of, I mean, as I know, as an American citizen trying to live anywhere, pretty much just dealing with visas and residence and citizenship and all of that stuff, that's just a real pain. So I definitely feel for you and the rest of my British friends out there.
Yeah, I just feel for the younger generation who won't have the freedom that we had as, when we were 30. We had that freedom to go to Europe, to work in France, Spain, Portugal, really easily. And I just find it really sad that won't be the case anymore. And I think we were very short-sighted. But anyway, that gets into the whole political argument around it, which we won't go into. But I suppose that for me, though, is the cultural challenge, because I'm obviously living in a country where people have, are pro-Brexit. And yeah, it's a bit like Trump or not Trump, we kind of, it's a conversation you tend not to have, actually. But
Right.
it's there, and it's there.
So how has this, maybe over the last years, and especially the last handful with dealing with the fallout of Brexit, also affected your business and maybe provided some opportunities or some difficulties in that as well? Would love to hear about how you've developed your business and how you can help people to overcome some of these difficulties when they think about moving abroad.
Yeah, and I think, the whole sort of experience, and Brexit's part of it, but just, from first leaving when I was 30, it just means that I've experienced moving as, just newly married, but then also as a new mum and, with kids at different stages. So I totally understand the challenges that people face in terms of, seeing it as an opportunity, but then facing some of what I call the hotspots, the challenges that, most people can overcome, but you have to work your way through. So it means that, I work with people, understanding the reality of the situations and the challenges, and therefore I can offer advice. I mean, I tend to offer advice around how people think about things, because I obviously can't make decisions for them, but I can point them in the right direction, and assist them as they make those decisions and start their plans. So that's how this has all sort of helped me. And I suppose I've linked it to the work, the work that I did with my master's was all about corporate relocation. And so I've linked it to that. And that's what my book is all about, moving as an international assignee and making it work for you and your family. Not just for you, the assignee, because that's the other side of it. I've seen, the number of the partners who go to and the challenges they face in creating meaningful lives for themselves. They leave careers behind often, professional identities that have to be reestablished in a new location. So that's part of the work I do as well, working with partners to work out how they make it all work positively for them too. I suppose this year, global mobility has been really challenged, hasn't it? And, people are either stuck in place or they're rethinking. I think what it does is highlight the importance of making informed decisions and deciding whether it's really, and when I say risk, I don't mean high risk, but, recognizing that moving does have an element of risk. So you need to be open to that and to think through it carefully. I don't mean to say no, but I think an informed decision where you understand what the potential challenges could be is really important, because it helps you plan, it helps you set realistic expectations, I think a lot of people fall down when their expectations are way in excess of the reality of the experience, and that's when challenges arise. So setting realistic expectations is really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's one of the first things I would tell people as well, is just, you may think that being in the middle of Paris is going to be just amazing. You're having your coffees, your baguettes, you're doing your whole French thing. But when you actually have to deal with bureaucracy, with finding an apartment, with your job, with the French culture, with the language, that's just one example, but you could pick a million different examples out there. It's going to be more difficult than it might be as someone's just thinking about it from the outset. And as you said, even earlier in your experience, okay, you had those great first months in Madrid, for example, so what's next? So I think just thinking through all that from the get-go is going to set people up better for success than just kind of going and crossing their fingers, hoping for the best.
Yeah. And I think it's difficult to know what your reality or what the experience is really going to be like until you're living there, because obviously you need to get there first.
Right.
I think to have some idea about how you want it to play out, some vision of what you're wanting to create is important. And it doesn't have to be specifics with specific goals, but just some idea that you then check against, research. And, so for example, I don't know, you use the example of Paris. And I suppose I think often people associate places with holidays and
yes,
feel of a holiday. Well, yes, of course, there's going to be elements of that when you move there. Of course, you can take that to the fullest advantage and enjoy it in that way. But you're also going to live your life there. And life comes with all the usual challenges it comes with back home. You're not going to leave those. In fact, as you've just said, those challenges are enhanced because you've got to get used to working in a different country, culture, with different processes, ways of being and working. So you need to be prepared for that and have that kind of adventurous spirit as well, and an open mindset, flexibility. All of those things are really important.
Yeah, 100%. That's great. Thanks for all of those insights. And I'd love just to hear about where our listeners can find out more about you and what you're up to.
Okay, yes. So I have a podcast called Thriving Abroad. And David, you're going to appear on it in the next few weeks. So go and take a look at that. And I suppose Thriving Abroad is all about understanding what it takes and what helps people to thrive internationally. So a lot of podcasts around, the challenge of relocation and transition. And I've got a new series coming up called Thriving Through Transitions, because although we may not all be moving as much as we had been pre-pandemic, we're all coping with a whole new set of transitions that, an adjustment to the pandemic and the situation. So I've got some great interviews and conversations coming up on that subject. And also a book by the same name, Thriving Abroad, the Definitive Guide to Professional and Personal Relocation Success. So if you're looking for some tips and, just some insights into the things to think about before making a relocation, it's set into 3 sections. The first is pre-decision, the second is planning and moving, and the third is settling in. So if you're looking for some tips there, that book might be helpful for you. But just go to thrivingabroad.com and you'll see access to the podcast and the book there.
Perfect. Well, I'll definitely include all of those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciated the conversation and hearing all of your experiences over the last 20 years, I think, being in all different countries. And so thank you for joining, and looking forward to keeping in touch and seeing where our international lives lead us.
Thank you, David. Thanks for the opportunity and lovely to talk to you today.
Thanks to Louise for sharing her story with us. You can find the full transcript for this episode at expatempire.com. Music on this episode was produced by Eli Hermit. Please check him out on Bandcamp and Spotify. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a minute and give us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps new listeners find us and lets us know that we are putting out content that you appreciate. You can quickly find out where and how to rate us at ratethispodcast.com/expatempire. If you know anyone who might enjoy this podcast, please tell them about it so that we can continue growing the global Expat Empire community. Keep up to date on new Expat Empire podcast episodes by pressing the subscribe button in the podcasting app of your choice. You can also visit expatempire.com and sign up for the newsletter to get our free ebook Top 10 Tips for Moving Abroad right now. We are also on Facebook and Instagram at Expat Empire, so be sure to follow us there. We're currently offering a free 30-minute consulting call to discuss your moving plans and how Expat Empire can help you to achieve them. Please visit our website to schedule your call today. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode in the coming weeks.